I didn't cry when my husband handed me divorce papers. I smiled because he had no idea he was standing in front of the woman he had been stealing from for 7 years. The paper didn't shake in my hands, but everything inside me did. That morning, the sunlight in our penthouse felt too clean, too innocent for what was happening. It spilled across the glass table where Julian Thorne had just placed the end of our marriage like it was a signed contract, not a life being erased. Behind him, his mother Margaret sat perfectly still, like she was watching a performance she had already paid for. And beside her, Bianca, young, calm, smiling faintly as she rested one hand on her stomach like she was already the future I was being replaced with. Julian didn't look at me when he spoke. "It's done, Clara." 3 words. That's all it took for 7 years to collapse into something disposable. I looked at the papers again. Divorce. Clean separation. No hesitation in the wording, no emotion, just procedure, like I was nothing more than a project he was closing. "Sign it," Margaret said sharply, as if I was already a problem lingering too long in her perfect world. Bianca didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence was rehearsed confidence. Julian finally met my eyes, but only briefly. No guilt. No regret. Only inconvenience. "You don't need to make this difficult," he said softly. 2 days ago would have been better, but let's not drag this out. Something inside me almost laughed. 2 days. That was the last piece of mercy they thought they were giving me. I slowly placed the papers back on the table, and then I said something that made the entire room pause. "Give me 2 days." Silence. Even Margaret blinked, like she had misheard me. Julian frowned slightly. "For what?" I held his gaze. "For closure." It wasn't true, but it was enough. After a long moment, he nodded once. "Fine, 2 days, but don't make this messy, Clara." Messy. That word followed me as I turned away. Because what they didn't know, what none of them had ever known, was that I had spent 7 years cleaning up after a mess I never created. And those 2 days? They weren't for closure. They were for war. I walked out of that room without shaking, without tears, without begging, but inside me, something long buried had finally started breathing again. Because the truth was, I hadn't always been Clara Thorne. Before him, I was Clara Vance. And Vance Industries wasn't just a name. It was a $40 billion empire built by my family architects, investors, visionaries. The kind of power people whispered about in boardrooms they never got invited into. I had walked away from it all for Julian. For love. For loyalty. For a man who told me I was too sensitive to understand business, while quietly stealing every blueprint I ever trusted him with. I remember the first time he did it. One of my designs, an entire sustainable city concept, appeared under his name in a global architecture showcase. I asked him about it. He smiled and said, "We're a team, Clara. Don't ruin success with ego." So I stayed quiet. That was my mistake. Not love. Silence. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark of the same home I once designed, piece by piece, the marble floors I chose, the lighting I mapped, the space I once believed was ours. Now it felt like a museum built around lies. At 3:07 a.m., I opened a locked file on my private drive. Something I hadn't touched in years. Vance Industries executive access restored. My name blinked on the screen like it had been waiting for me to come back, and I understood something very clearly in that moment. They hadn't taken my life. They had just delayed the moment I took it back. Because tomorrow, I wasn't going to be the woman signing divorce papers. I was going to be the woman ending empires. And before we continue, if you enjoy intense, emotional storytelling like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story that will make you feel every word. By morning, the city outside our penthouse was already moving like nothing had happened. That's the strange thing about betrayal. It doesn't stop the world. It just changes the way you see it. I stood by the window, watching traffic cut through the early light. People were rushing to work, sipping coffee, checking phones, arguing over small things that still mattered to them. Meanwhile, my life had quietly split in two. Before divorce papers, and after, The door to the bedroom opened behind me. Julian walked out like nothing had changed. Crisp shirt, expensive watch. The same calm expression he wore in boardrooms when deciding the fate of companies he never built from scratch. He glanced at me briefly. "You didn't sleep," he said. It wasn't concern, just observation. "I did," I replied. That was a lie, but he didn't care enough to notice. He adjusted his cufflinks. "The papers need to be finalized today. My lawyer will follow up." Today. He was already trying to compress my 2 days into something manageable. Behind him, Margaret's voice floated from the hallway. "Make sure she doesn't try anything dramatic." Dramatik. I almost smiled at that. Because what they called drama, I called documentation. Every stolen design. Every fake credit. Every offshore account. Every shell company Julian and his partners had built using my work as fuel. They thought I was quiet because I was broken. But I was quiet because I was counting. At 9:12 a.m., I left the penthouse. No one stopped me. No one followed me. That was their second mistake. Because when people believe you are powerless, they never think to watch where you go. The black car waiting downstairs wasn't mine. It belonged to Walter Crane. He stood outside it already, holding the door open. Walter had worked for Vance Industries long before I was old enough to understand what power meant. He had known my father, and more importantly, he knew what I was before I ever forgot it. "You're late coming back," he said quietly as I stepped in. "I wasn't sure I would," I replied. He closed the door without another word. Inside the car, silence settled between us. Not uncomfortable, familiar. "You're certain?" he asked after a moment. I looked out the window as the city blurred past. "They gave me 2 days," I said. "I only need 1. Walter didn't respond immediately. Instead, he handed me a tablet. On the screen, financial trails, ownership structures, encrypted transfers, names I hadn't seen in years. Julian Thorne, Leo Strickland, Harold Vance. That last name made my fingers still slightly. Harold Vance wasn't family, but he worked like he was. A senior executive inside Vance Industries who had always smiled too much at meetings and asked too few questions. Now I understood why. $31 million moved through shell companies in under 2 years, Walter said. All tied back to Thorne's acquisition network, and Vance internal systems were used to validate fake loans. My eyes stayed on the screen. "Not surprise. Confirmation." "You already had this," I said. Walter nodded. "We've been tracking irregular access for months. We just didn't know who inside the company was feeding it outward." I finally looked at him. "And now you do." He hesitated. Then, Harold Vance. A slow breath left my chest. So it wasn't just theft. It was inside my own house. By the time we reached the Vance Industries tower, the sky had turned pale gold. The building stood like a quiet thread against the horizon. Glass, steel, power disguised as architecture. I hadn't walked through those doors as CEO in years. Not since I chose love over legacy. The lobby recognized me before anyone spoke my name. Security straightened. Receptionists froze. Whispers started before I even reached the elevator. "Is that?" "No, she left years ago." "She's back?" I didn't look at them. I didn't need to. The elevator doors closed, sealing me into silence. Walter stood beside me. "The board meeting is already scheduled for tomorrow," he said. "I'm not waiting for tomorrow." He glanced at me. "Then today it is." On the 47th floor, the executive suite still smelled the same. Polished wood, fresh paper, expensive ambition. Rebecca Cole was already waiting. Sharp suit, sharper eyes. "I heard you were dead," she said flatly. "Rumors are generous," I replied. A faint smirk crossed her face. "Good, because dead CEOs don't cancel billion-dollar acquisitions." She slid a folder toward me. Inside, Julian Thorne's acquisition approval request for Vance linked assets. My company, my name, used as collateral in his expansion plan. They were hours away from locking it, Rebecca said. I closed the folder. "Cancel it." She didn't ask twice. That was the difference between people who believed in power and people who understood it. She made one call. 2 minutes later, her expression changed slightly. "It's done," she said, "but he's going to notice. I want him to." The next stop was forensic. Dr. Irene Zhao met us in a secured room filled with monitors and digital maps of financial flows. She didn't greet me with surprise, only focus. "I've seen worse," she said, tapping the screen. "But not cleaner. Whoever did this knew exactly how to hide it inside legitimate structures." "That would be Julian," I said. She nodded once. "Then he's very careful." "Not careful enough," I replied, "because careless men always make the same mistake. They believe success protects them. It doesn't. It only exposes them later." By evening, the pieces were no longer scattered. They were aligned. Walter leaned over the table. "Once we push this, there's no going back." I looked at everything spread in front of me. The fraud, the stolen designs, the internal betrayal, the man who had smiled while building a life on my silence. "I don't want going back," I said quietly, and for the first time in 7 years, I didn't feel like I was surviving. I felt like I was returning. Somewhere across the city, Julian Thorne was still signing papers, believing he had won something. But power is strange. It doesn't announce when it changes hands. It simply waits, and then it moves. Julian called me on the morning of the second day. I didn't answer at first. The phone kept vibrating on the glass table beside me, like it still had authority over my time, like it still meant something. It didn't. Finally, I picked up. "Clara." His voice came through smooth, controlled, almost bored. "We need to finalize the paperwork. My lawyer is pushing for closure today." Closure. He loved that word now, as if ending me was just another task on his schedule. "I told you 2 days," I said calmly. "A pause." Then a small sigh. "Don't turn this into something emotional. You're better than that. Better than emotion." That was always his favorite way to dismiss me. I looked out at the city skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Vance Industries headquarters. From up here, everything looked small. Even men like Julian. "I'll meet you when I'm ready," I said. Then I ended the call, not out of anger, out of distance, because something had changed inside me overnight. I was no longer trying to be understood. I was preparing to be undeniable. At 10:18 a.m., Rebecca Cole entered the conference room with a stack of legal files so thick they looked like architecture plans. Walter was already there. Dr. Irene Zhao followed, tablet in hand. And then the door opened one final time. "Agent Maria Santos, IFB." She didn't waste time on introductions. Her presence alone changed the temperature in the room. "We've reviewed the preliminary data," she said. "If this is accurate, we're looking at coordinated fraud across multiple jurisdictions." I nodded. "It is accurate." She studied me carefully. "You understand what this means? Once this starts, it cannot be controlled." "I'm not here to control it," I said. "I'm here to end it." A long silence followed. Then she placed a file on the table. Then we moved forward. That was it. No drama. No warning. Just the beginning of something irreversible. The first move wasn't loud. It never is. At 11:03 a.m., Vance Industries froze every pending transaction tied to Julian Thorne's acquisition group. At 11:07 a.m., 3 offshore accounts flagged under Leo Strickland's network were locked. At 11:12 a.m., internal audit systems flagged $31 million in unauthorized movement traced through shell companies disguised as consulting firms. By 11:15 a.m., the silence in the boardroom upstairs had already turned into confusion. And confusion is the first crack in every empire. I watched it all unfold from the glass wall of my office. Walter stood beside me. "He'll know it was you," he said quietly. "I want him to." Rebecca glanced over. "His lawyers are already calling. They're saying this is a breach of contract." I almost laughed. "Everything he built was a breach of something," I said. Dr. Zhao didn't look up from her screen. "We found something else." That made me turn. She hesitated only once, then slid the file forward. "Harold Vance. Inside Transactions. authorization signatures, encrypted approvals routed through internal systems I once designed myself. My stomach tightened not with surprise, with recognition, because betrayal inside a corporation never feels like strangers. It feels like employees you once trusted at meetings, people who smiled when you walked into rooms, people who said good morning like it meant nothing deeper. Harold had full access to architectural IP systems, Dr. Zhao continued. He was exporting proprietary designs to Strickland's network for years. Walter exhaled slowly. So it wasn't just Julian. No, I said quietly, it never is. At 12:40 p.m., the first call came. Julian. This time, I answered. Clara. His voice wasn't calm anymore. There was something underneath it now. Pressure, sharp edges. What the hell is happening with Vance Systems? I leaned back in my chair. I'm not sure, I said. Silence. Then a sharper tone. Don't play games. My acquisition is frozen. Accounts are locked. Someone inside your company is sabotaging everything. My company, I repeated softly. That pause was different. Longer. He noticed it too. What did you do? He asked. And for the first time since I signed those divorce papers, I smiled. Not warmly. Not kindly. I didn't do anything, I said. I came home. The line went quiet. Then his voice dropped. You think this is funny? No, I replied. I think it's overdue. And I ended the call again. By 2 p.m., things stopped being quiet. FBI agents entered multiple corporate locations across 3 cities. Documents were seized. Servers were mirrored. Financial trails were reconstructed in real time. And for the first time in years, Julian Thorne's world stopped looking like success and started looking like evidence. Bianca arrived at Vance Industries just after 3 p.m. No one expected her. She looked different in person, less polished than the version Julian kept beside him. Tired eyes, nervous hands. She asked for me. Walter brought her in. When she saw me, she hesitated. I didn't know everything, she said immediately. I studied her. I believe you, I replied. That surprised her. I saw things, accounts, meetings, names I wasn't supposed to ask about. Why are you here? I asked. Her hands trembled slightly. Because he said if I stayed quiet, we'd be safe. A pause. And I don't think that's true anymore. I nodded once. Not judgment. Recognition. Because fear always sounds like that. Eventually, she handed over a flash drive. I copied everything I could from his personal files, she said. Then she looked at me carefully. You're not what he said you were. I didn't respond. Because I didn't need to. I already knew. By sunset, the structure of Julian Thorne's empire was no longer standing. It was collapsing in controlled pieces. Not chaos. Order. The kind of order that only comes when someone finally stops protecting the truth. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Harold Vance was escorted out of Vance Industries headquarters in silence. No resistance. No speeches. Just consequences finally arriving on time. That night, Walter stood beside me on the rooftop. The city stretched endlessly below us. Lights flickering like distant thoughts. He'll fight back, Walter said. I know, I replied. He always has. A pause. Then I added quietly. But this time, he doesn't know what he's fighting. Because for 7 years, Julian Thorne had believed he built his success on intelligence. But what he actually built it on was me not standing up. And that difference changes everything. The first time Julian showed fear, I didn't see it in his face. I heard it in his silence. It came at 6:11 a.m. the next morning. No greeting, no charm, no controlled tone, just breathing on the other end of the line. Then, what did you do to me, Clara? That was all he said. No accusation, not anger, something closer to disbelief. Like reality had finally stopped obeying him. I sat by the window of my office at Vance Industries, watching the city wake up beneath me. I didn't do anything to you, I said quietly. A pause. Then his voice sharpened. My accounts are frozen. My acquisition is gone. FBI agents are crawling through my financials like I'm a criminal. Another pause. And now people are saying, you're behind it. I leaned back slightly. I didn't become anything, Julian, I said. I stopped pretending I wasn't who I am. Silence. This one lasted longer, because somewhere in his mind, something was breaking. Not his empire yet. His certainty. At 9:30 M. Agent Maria Santos arrived in person. This time, she wasn't alone. 2 federal analysts, 1 forensic auditor, and a sealed case file thick enough to change careers. She placed it on the table in front of me. It's complete, she said. I didn't open it. I already knew what was inside. Every shell company, every fake loan, every internal signature traced back through systems Harold Vance thought were invisible. And at the center of it all, Julian Thorne and Leo Strickland, 2 men who mistook borrowed brilliance for their own intelligence. Walter stood behind me, arms crossed. This will go public within hours. Rebecca Cole nodded. Court filing is ready. Once it hits, there's no containment. Dr. Irene Zhao added quietly. He won't survive it financially. I finally looked at the file. Not with satisfaction. Not with revenge. With finality. Because I wasn't trying to destroy him. I was just removing the protection he had been hiding behind. At 11:02 M. Julian came in person. No appointment. No warning. Just presence. Security tried to stop him, but I told them to let him through. When he stepped into my office, he didn't look like the man from the penthouse anymore. The confidence was still there, but cracked at the edges. Like expensive glass under pressure. His eyes moved through the room slowly. Walter, Rebecca, Dr. Zhao, Agent Santos, then finally me. You built this? He asked, voice lower than I expected. No, I said calmly. I exposed it. He gave a short laugh, but it didn't land. You're telling me you've been sitting on this for years? I stood up, slowly. Years? I repeated. I've been living inside it. That stopped him. For the first time, Julian didn't have a response ready. Agent Santos stepped forward. Mr. Thorne, we have enough evidence to proceed with immediate charges for fraud, IP theft, and financial conspiracy. Julian didn't look at her. He kept looking at me, like I was still something he could negotiate with. Clara, he said softer now, we can fix this. Whatever this is, we can handle it privately. That almost made me feel something. Almost. But then I remembered the divorce papers, the glass table, Bianca's hand on her stomach, Margaret's voice calling me temporary, and all the years I spent being reduced to something convenient. So I shook my head. No, I said, you don't get to handle me privately anymore. That was when something shifted in him. Not rage. Realization. Bianca arrived shortly after. No one told Julian she was coming. When she stepped into the room, everything went still. Even him. She didn't look at him at first. She looked at me. I gave them everything I had, she said quietly. Julian's expression tightened. What is she talking about? He asked. But Bianca didn't answer him. Instead, she said, he used my name on documents I never signed. He said it was for tax purposes. A pause. Then her voice cracked slightly. And I believed him. Julian exhaled sharply. You're pregnant. You don't understand legal structures. Don't. She cut in suddenly. That surprised everyone. Even May. She turned to him fully now. I understand enough to know I was being used. Silence fell again. But this one felt heavier. Because betrayal doesn't come from enemies. It comes from trust that finally speaks back. By 1:15 p.m., federal agents moved in. Not dramatic, not chaotic, controlled, documented, systematic. Julian Thorne didn't resist at first. He just stood there watching as years of carefully built illusion were turned into labeled evidence. Until one officer read out loud, multiple counts of intellectual property theft from Vance Industries' architectural division. That's when he looked at me again. And I saw it. Not arrogance. Not anger. Loss. Everything I built. He started. You built on me, I finished quietly. That was the first time he didn't interrupt me. Margaret arrived an hour later, but not for him, for herself. She didn't look at Julian when she entered. She looked at me. For the first time in years, there was no superiority in her expression, only calculation gone wrong. You did this, she said flatly. I nodded once. Yes. A pause. And you let it happen for 7 years? She added bitterly. That made something inside me settle. Because she was right. But not in the way she thought. I didn't let it happen, I said calmly. I survived it. And there is a difference people only understand when it's too late. By evening, Julian Thorne was no longer a CEO. He was a case file. Leo Strickland was already detained. Harold Vance was under internal investigation with full cooperation agreements forming. And Bianca was sitting in a separate room, finally speaking her truth without fear of him listening. As for Margaret, she left quietly. No speeches. No dignity left to perform. Just a woman realizing that power she believed she controlled was never hers to begin with. That night, the city looked different from my office. Not smaller. Clearer. Walter stood beside me. It's done, he said. I nodded slowly. Yes, but I didn't feel victorious. I felt aligned, like something inside me had finally returned to its correct place. Because the truth was never about destroying Julian Thorne. It was about remembering I was never nothing. I was just buried under someone else's ambition. And now that the weight was gone, I could finally stand properly again. The next morning didn't feel like victory. It felt like silence after a storm has already chosen where it wants to land. The kind of silence that makes you realize the damage wasn't loud. It was precise. At 7:04 a.m., Vance Industries released its official statement. No emotion, no speculation, just facts. Internal financial misconduct uncovered. Full cooperation with federal authorities. By 7:12 a.m., Julian Thorne's name was already trending across business networks. By 7:30 a.m., analysts started calling it what it was. Collapse. I sat in my office watching the news cycle unfold across multiple screens. Each headline repeating the same truth in different languages. Thorne Empire under investigation. $31 million fraud network exposed. Architectural IP theft scandal expands. But none of it felt like noise anymore. It felt like distance. Like I was finally far enough away from the version of my life where all of this could hurt me. Walter entered quietly and placed a file on my desk. Plea negotiations started, he said. I nodded without looking up. And Julian? Still in custody. No bail. A pause. Then he added carefully. He asked for you. That made my hand still slightly on the edge of the desk. Not because I was surprised. Because I already knew that moment would come. I'm not going, I said. Walter didn't argue. He never did when I spoke like that. At 10:45 a.m., Rebecca Cole entered with a second file. This one was different. He's trying to shift liability, she said, claiming Leo Strickland orchestrated most of the fraud. I opened it slowly. Of course he was. Julian had always been good at survival. Not truth. Survival. Will it work? I asked. Rebecca shook her head. Not anymore. Bianca's statement alone destroys that narrative. And the internal logs we recovered from Vance Systems, it all traces back to him. I closed the file. So this is the end, I said quietly. It's the end of his version of it, she replied. That was the difference. Truth doesn't have versions, only consequences. At noon, Dr. Irene Zhao came in last. Her expression was softer than usual. Something you should see, she said. She placed a single document on the table. Not financial, not legal. Personal. It was a private architectural submission file. One of mine. A design I had created years ago. A conceptual skyline for coastal cities. Something I remembered drawing at 2 a.m. in a quiet kitchen while Julian slept beside me, unaware that I was building the foundation of his future success. But this version had changes. My name was removed and replaced. Julian Thorne. I stared at it longer than I expected. Not Anger. No shock. Just understanding finally settling into place. He didn't just steal my work, I said quietly. He erased me from it. Dr. Zhao nodded. System logs confirm repeated re-uploading under his credentials. This wasn't accidental duplication. It was deliberate attribution rewriting. A slow breath left my chest. So it wasn't just fraud. It was identity theft disguised as success. Walter leaned forward slightly. He built his entire reputation on your absence. That line stayed in the air longer than the others. Because it was true. And truth is heavier when you stop avoiding it. At 2:18 p.m., Bianca asked to see me again. This time, I agreed. She looked different again. Not fragile, not afraid. Just awake. I testified fully, she said immediately. I know, I replied. She nodded. I wanted you to hear it from me directly. A pause. Then her voice softened. I didn't know who he really was when I met him. I thought I was part of something important. I studied her carefully, and I realized something unexpected. She wasn't like Margaret. She wasn't like Julian. She wasn't even like me in the early years. She had learned. That mattered. You were used, I said simply. She exhaled slowly. I know that now. Silence. Then she added, I'm leaving the city. I nodded once. That might be wise. She hesitated. Do you hate me? That question landed quietly between us. I thought about it. About 7 years of invisibility. About being replaced. About being dismissed in rooms I helped design. And I realized something important. I don't hate you, I said finally. I don't have space for that anymore. That was the truth, and she seemed to understand it. By evening, Julian signed the first set of formal admissions. Not because he wanted to, because there was nothing left to argue. Leo Strickland flipped under pressure. Harold Vance resigned before termination, but it didn't matter anymore. His access had already been stripped, and Margaret Thorne quietly began liquidating what remained of her influence, trying to salvage dignity from financial ruin. But none of that reached me anymore, because I wasn't inside that world now. I was above it, not emotionally, structurally. That night, Walter and I stood in the executive conference room. The city stretched endlessly outside the glass walls. He spoke first. You're the CEO now, fully reinstated. I nodded slowly. I never stopped being it, I said. I just forgot for a while. A long while. He smiled faintly. What happens now? I looked out at the skyline. At buildings I had once only imagined. At systems I had designed but never been allowed to lead. At a city that had unknowingly grown on my ideas. And I answered honestly. Now, we fix what people like him broke. A pause. And what about him? Walter asked carefully. I didn't turn. Julian Thorne is no longer my responsibility, I said quietly. He stopped being that the moment he signed those papers. And for the first time in 7 years, I meant it, because the truth about power is this. It doesn't arrive when you win. It arrives when you no longer need to prove you did. The courtroom didn't feel like justice at first. It felt like exposure. The kind that strips a life down layer by layer until nothing remains except what is undeniable. I arrived early, not because I wanted to, because people like Julian Thorne always arrive late to consequences, as if time itself should still respect them. The public gallery was already full. Reporters, analysts, former colleagues, people who once shook his hand like he mattered. Now they watched like he was a story they had all unknowingly participated in. I sat quietly beside Walter. Rebecca Cole was at the front table, Dr. Irene Zhao behind her, and Agent Maria Santos stood near the prosecution side with the calm precision of someone who had done this many times before but still understood its weight. The doors opened at 10:03 a.m. Julian entered in handcuffs, and for the first time in 7 years, he didn't look untouchable. He looked real. His eyes moved across the room slowly. When they found me, they stopped. Not anger, not defiance, something quieter. Recognition. Because this was no longer the world where I belonged to him. This was the world where he finally belonged to truth. The proceedings began without ceremony. Evidence was presented like architecture being dismantled, layer by layer. Brique by brique. Unauthorized intellectual property transfers, fraudulent financial structures totaling $31 million, system-level manipulation of internal Vance Industries design archives. Each statement landed in the room like a weight settling into place. And Julian didn't interrupt once. That alone told me everything. Because men like him don't stay silent unless they realize speaking no longer matters. Then Bianca was called. She walked to the stand slowly. Not fragile, not afraid, just honest. Her voice didn't shake when she spoke. He told me I was part of something secure, she said. That everything was legal, that I didn't need to ask questions. A pause. Then she looked directly at Julian. I stopped asking questions because I trusted you. The room went still. Even the reporters stopped typing. Because betrayal spoken aloud in truth is heavier than any document. Then came Dr. Irene Zhao. Technical, precise, unshakable. She explained the systems, the duplicated authentication layers, the masked transaction routes, the embedded design theft protocols hidden inside architectural files I once created. And as she spoke, I watched something shift in Julian's expression. Not denial, not defense. Understanding. Because for the first time, he wasn't being accused. He was being explained. And there's no escape from that kind of clarity. When Rebecca Cole stood to present Vance Industries' internal audit findings, her voice cut clean through the room. This was not accidental misuse, she said firmly. This was sustained exploitation of proprietary intellectual property belonging to Clara Vance over a period of 7 years. That name landed differently in the courtroom. Not Clara Thorne. Not former spouse. Clara Vance. And I felt it then. The shift. The moment I stopped being associated with him in any legal sense and started existing as myself again. Agent Santos stepped forward next. Her tone was calm, but final. The Federal Bureau of Investigation is proceeding with charges including conspiracy, fraud, and cross-border financial manipulation. A pause. Then she added something that changed the atmosphere entirely. Mr. Thorne has agreed to a formal plea. That word, agreed. Not fought. Not resisted. Agreed. Julian finally spoke then. His voice was lower than I remembered. Controlled, but stripped of its old confidence. I didn't steal everything, he said quietly. I built something too. There was no reaction at first, because everyone in that room understood the difference now. But I answered anyway. Not loudly, not emotionally, just clearly enough for him to hear. You built it on my silence. That was all. And he didn't respond. The judge delivered the ruling like it was already decided long before today. Guilty on multiple counts. Asset seizure. Corporate disqualification. Federal sentencing pending full cooperation review. No theatrics. No dramatic pauses. Just closure in legal language. And as the words settled, I noticed something strange. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt completion. Outside the courtroom, the press waited like a storm that had finally found its target. But I didn't stop. Neither did Walter. Neither did Rebecca. Because there is a point where public opinion stops mattering, and only truth remains relevant. That evening, Julian was transferred under federal custody. As he was escorted out, he paused briefly near the hallway exit. For a second, he looked back. Not at the reporters. Not at the lawyers. At me. There was no speech left in him. No negotiation. No version of himself that could rewrite what had already been decided. Just a man finally seeing the full shape of what he had ignored. I didn't move. Neither did I look away. Because looking away would have meant there was still something unresolved between us. And there wasn't. By the time the city lights turned on, everything had already changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. Walter stood beside me outside the courthouse steps. He's gone, he said quietly. I nodded. Yes. A pause. And Margaret? He asked. She'll survive, I replied. Then I added, just not comfortably. Because consequences don't always destroy people. Sometimes they simply removed the illusion that protected them. That night, I returned to Vance Industries alone. The building was quiet again. But this time, it didn't feel like emptiness. It felt like ownership. I stood in my office and looked out over the city I had helped shape without ever being credited for it. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel erased. I felt visible. Not because the world finally saw me, but because I finally did. And somewhere, far away from glass towers and boardrooms, Julian Thorne was no longer building anything at all. He was learning what it means to stand in the absence of everything you once took for granted. The first week after the trial ended felt strangely ordinary. That was the part no one tells you about justice. It doesn't arrive with music or celebration. It arrives like silence finally deciding to stay. I went to work every morning at Vance Industries. Same building, same elevator, different weight on my shoulders. People looked at me differently now. Not with curiosity like before, but with certainty. As if they were still adjusting to the fact that I had always been here, even when they chose not to see me. Walter met me every morning without fail. No unnecessary questions. Just updates. Board is stable. Markets reacted positively. Legal exposure is contained. Simple sentences that meant entire worlds had stopped collapsing. Rebecca Cole had moved into full restructuring mode. Dr. Irene Zhao was rebuilding internal audit systems from the ground up, and Agent Maria Santos had transitioned out of active oversight, leaving behind a final note. Case closed. Fully cooperative resolution achieved. But even after all that, I didn't feel like I was finished. I felt like I was finally beginning. One afternoon, I walked alone through the design floor, the same place where my ideas had once been quietly stored under other names. Now it was different. My name was back on every file. Every concept credited correctly. Every design restored to its origin. But I didn't stop at recognition. I stopped at correction. Because recognition fixes the past. Correction builds the future. I called the entire team into the main hall. They came quickly. Some nervous. Some curious. Some still unsure of what kind of CEO I was going to be. I stood at the front without notes, without preparation, because I didn't need either anymore. We're rebuilding how this company creates, I said calmly. A few heads lifted. We are no longer going to design for recognition, we are designing for impact. A pause. Then I added something that shifted the room's energy, and no one here will ever lose credit for their work again. Silence. Then movement. Not applause. Something better. Understanding. That evening, Walter walked beside me as we left the building. You've changed the entire structure in 2 weeks, he said. I didn't change it, I replied. I removed what was pretending to be structure. He smiled slightly. That sounds like you. We stepped outside. The city air was cooler than usual. Or maybe I was just noticing it differently. Do you ever think about him? Walter asked carefully. I knew who he meant without needing the name. Julian. I kept walking. Yes, I said. A pause. But not the way I used to. Then how? He asked. I looked at the skyline, at the buildings that had once been symbols of his success. Now I saw them differently. As systems. As design. As structures that existed because many hands built them, not just one man's name. I think about how easy it is, I said quietly, for people to believe they are the center of everything they touch. Walter didn't respond immediately, because there was nothing to correct in that statement. 2 days later, Bianca sent me a letter. Not an email. A handwritten letter. She was leaving the country permanently. The message was simple. No apologies for what she didn't know. No excuses for what she believed. Just one line that stayed with me longer than I expected. I stopped waiting for someone to tell me who I was supposed to be. I placed the letter back in its envelope slowly. And I realized something. Everyone in this story had been living inside someone else's definition. Except me. I just forgot I wasn't supposed to stay there. At Vance Industries, a new foundation was announced. Not for publicity. Not for branding. For survivors. Domestic abuse survivors. Women who had been financially controlled. Professionally erased. Emotionally diminished. We called it the Vance Reconstruction Initiative. When the press asked me why I started it, I didn't give them a dramatic answer. I simply said, because I understand what it means to be rewritten. That was enough. One evening, I stayed late in the office. The city outside was glowing softly. Walter knocked once before entering. "You should go home," he said. I didn't look away from the window. "I am home," I replied. "A pause." Then he placed a folder on my desk. "What's this?" I asked. "Final asset report from the Thorn case," he said. I opened it slowly. Everything had been liquidated. Accounts closed. Properties reassigned. Legal structures dismantled. But at the bottom, there was one remaining note. Julian Thorn remaining sentence pending federal review. I closed the folder. Not because it hurt, because it didn't. And that was the difference now. Later that night, I stood alone in the executive suite. No chaos, no tension, no hidden betrayal waiting in corners. Just me, and a city that no longer felt like it belonged to someone else. I walked to the glass wall and placed my hand lightly against it. 7 years ago, I had given away my identity to love someone who mistook it for weakness. Now I understood something simple. Strength is not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It just returns when it's ready. And for the first time since everything began, I wasn't surviving a story. I was writing the next one. I didn't go back to the courtroom for the final sentencing. I didn't need to. Some endings don't require witnesses. They just require acceptance. Walter brought me the news instead, early in the morning, as I stood by the window of my office watching the city wake up again. 7 years, he said quietly. That was the sentence. 7 years. It felt almost symbolic, like the number had been waiting for itself to be returned. I nodded once. "And Julian?" "Federal transfer confirmed," he said. "No public statements, no appeals so far." I didn't respond immediately. Not because I was surprised, but because I was trying to feel something that wasn't there anymore. Envie, regret, even satisfaction. But what I felt instead was something simpler. Distance. The kind that comes when a chapter stops echoing inside you. Later that day, I visited the design floor alone. The space was alive again. Not with tension, not with silence, but with creation. Teams were working openly now. Credit boards displayed real names. Ideas were being discussed without fear of appropriation. A young architect approached me hesitantly. "Miss Vance," she said, "I just wanted to say thank you." I looked at her. "For what?" "For making it safe to be seen," she said softly. That stayed with me longer than I expected, because I realized something in that moment. I hadn't just taken my life back. I had changed what it meant for others to keep theirs. That evening, I returned to the penthouse for the last time. Not Julian's penthouse anymore. Just mine. Or maybe not even that. The space felt unfamiliar now, like a place I had once passed through while becoming someone else. I walked slowly through each room. The kitchen where I once made coffee for a man who never remembered how I liked mine. The living room where I once signed away parts of myself without knowing. The glass table where divorce papers had once landed like finality. I stopped there for a long moment. Then I smiled faintly. Not because it meant anything now, but because it didn't. The next morning, I signed the official transfer papers. Vance Industries CEO designation, confirmed. No interim, no acting title, just truth on paper. Walter stood beside me as I signed. "Feels different?" he asked. I thought about it. "Yes," I said, "but not heavier." "Lighter?" he asked. I shook my head slowly. "Clearer?" Because weight implies burden, and I wasn't carrying this anymore. I was directing it. Weeks passed, then months. The world slowly stopped attaching Julian Thorn's name to my life. The news moved on. The headlines changed. Stories evolved. That's what the world does. It forgets loudly, then moves forward quietly. But I didn't forget him. Not because I was holding on, but because I understood him now. Not as a villain, not as a lesson, but as a reflection of what happens when someone mistakes access for ownership. One afternoon, I received a final letter. No return address. No official seal. Just handwriting. His. I didn't open it immediately. I placed it on my desk and looked at it for a long time. Walter noticed. "Do you want me to remove it?" I shook my head. No. Later that night, I opened it. It wasn't long. No pleading. No defense. Just one line. "I thought I was building something. I didn't realize I was standing inside you." I read it once. Then again. And then I folded it carefully. Not out of emotion, but closure. Because for the first time, his words didn't pull me backward. They confirmed what I already knew. He had never taken me. He had only borrowed from something he couldn't replace. That night, I stood alone in the Vance Industries tower. The city stretched endlessly beyond the glass. Alive, unapologetic, unaware of how many invisible hands built it. Walter had already left. The building was quiet, and I realized something I hadn't felt in years. Stillness. Not emptiness. Not loneliness. Stillness. The kind that doesn't ask you to prove anything. I thought about the woman I used to be. The one who believed love meant disappearing a little to make space for someone else. The one who mistook silence for peace. The one who thought being needed was the same as being valued. And I felt no sadness for her. Only recognition. Because she didn't fail. She just outgrew the world she was trying to fit into. I placed my hand against the glass. The city reflected back at me not as something I lived under, but something I now stood above in understanding. And I whispered softly enough that only I could hear it. "I am not what they took from me. Abhause. I am what they couldn't keep." Then I turned away. Not from the past, but from the need for it to define me. And for the first time, I walked forward without looking back. And maybe that's what people never understand about survival. It doesn't end when the truth comes out. It ends when the truth no longer needs your attention. So let me ask you this. If you were in my place after everything I lost, everything I reclaimed, and everything I became, would you have chosen revenge? Or would you have chosen to rebuild? Tell me in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us who we are when everything else is stripped away.